नमस्कार, समयभित्रको समयमा यहाँहरूलाई हार्दिक स्वागत छ। आज हामीसँग प्रोफेसर टिमोथी लुबिन हुनुहुन्छ, जसलाई चाहिँ नि छोटकरीमा टिम लुबिन बाट पनि चिनिन्छ। उहाँ चाहिँ नि वासिङटन एन्ड ली युनिभर्सिटी, जो चाहिँ अमेरिकामा छ, ठुलो युनिभर्सिटी हो, त्यसमा पढाउनुहुन्छ। उहाँ संस्कृतका ज्ञाता हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँले चाहिँ नि हिन्दुइजम पढाउनुहुन्छ। हिन्दू धर्मशास्त्रको धेरै कुराहरू उहाँलाई थाहा छ। नेपालको पनि उहाँले आफ्ना विद्यार्थीहरूलाई मुलुकी ऐन पढाउनुहुन्छ, हैन, कानुन र धर्मशास्त्र पढाउनुहुन्छ। र उहाँले चाहिँ कोलम्बिया युनिभर्सिटी र हार्वर्ड युनिभर्सिटीबाट आफ्नो पढाइ पुरा गर्नुभएको हो। यस्तो ठुलो स्कलरसँग कुरा गर्न पाउँदा आज मलाई धेरै नै खुसी लागेको छ। वेलकम प्रोफेसर टिम, नमस्ते।
नमस्ते।
धेरै खुसी लागेको छ। कहाँबाट कुरा सुरु गरौँ? यु नो नेपाली, यु अन्डरस्ट्यान्ड नेपाली?
मलाई नेपाली आउँछ, but I think it's easier for me if we talk in English.
In English?
Yes.
So उहाँले चाहिँ यहाँले चाहिँ अब संस्कृत पनि बुझ्नुहुन्छ, बुझ्ने मात्रै होइन, संस्कृतको पनि ज्ञाता हुनुहुन्छ। यु स्टडिड संस्कृत एन्ड यु टिच संस्कृत ल्याङ्ग्वेज एन्ड धर्मशास्त्र. We'll be talking about Hinduism, Dharmashastra, Prithvinarayan Shaha, or you know, about our country, about many things. So maybe you know we can start by saying some mantras or some poem or Meghdut.
Why don't I start with a
whatever you feel comfortable.
Maybe
any Sanskrit.
Sure, maybe a verse or two of Meghdut.
Okay.
It's a very beautiful poem in the Mandakranta meter. So it begins, Kaschit kanta viraha guruna svadikarat pramattaha shapena stangamita mahima varsha bhogena bhartuhu yakshashchakre janakatanaya snana punyorkeshu snigdha chaya tarushu vasatim Ramagiryashrameshu tasminnadrau katichidabala viprayukta sakami nitvamasan kanakavalaya brahmsharikta prakoshta ashadasya pratamadivase megamashlishta sanum vaprakrida parinatagaja prekshaniyam dadarsha. Pardon.
Thank you very much. So, many other mantras too. That is, I know. So how became you interested in Sanskrit?
Yes. It's interesting that I began by studying classical languages in the Western tradition.
Okay.
But when I started my master's degree program in comparative study of religions at Harvard.
It was in Harvard?
That was at Harvard. A friend of mine who was intending to study Buddhism and had begun the study of Sanskrit already, and she told me that I would definitely enjoy it. And, as they say, I fell down a rabbit hole. That is to say, using the metaphor from Alice in Wonderland, I just discovered this whole world that I hadn't been aware of before, but a world which had some interesting sort of cultural and historical interconnections with the classical studies that I'd already done. And one of the things that I was particularly fascinated with at that time was the role of ritual, ritual practices.
In Hinduism?
In human life generally.
Any religion.
And this was an area of religious practice which is very prominent in Hinduism. So I became preoccupied with that. And actually my doctoral studies were in a cluster of practices that have to do with consecrating a person for religious activity. So that can mean the initiation that one might undergo to study sacred texts, or it might involve the consecration, the purification and consecration that someone would undergo to make offerings. There are certain rites called diksha or upanayan or various things, various rites of that sort, and they all have similar features.
Yeah.
And these features also appear in rites that people perform to sort of, if they've done something wrong and they wish to purify themselves for that purpose. So in other words, these are ceremonies, rituals of purification for a variety of purposes. And I got very interested in that. That was the subject of my doctoral studies.
Okay, so you started Sanskrit and learn and read.
That's right.
So Sanskrit is not an easy task or easy subject, you know.
Yes.
It is very difficult to pronounce.
Well, no, it's not an easy subject.
It's
a difficult subject.
Difficult.
But it was very interesting to me. And of course, when one is very interested in a subject, it becomes easier for that reason. And so this was beginning back
So you had private tuition as well, or?
No, so it began in the classroom at Harvard in the late 1980s.
Okay.
And I finished my degree at Harvard and continued at Columbia, where I studied with Barbara Stoller Miller, who is well known in the U.S. as a translator of Sanskrit texts such as Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutra. Before those works, she published
Sanskrit to English?
Sanskrit to English, yes.
Okay.
She makes very beautiful translations, also of Shatakatrayam, the Bhartrahari's 300 verses, and other works in the devotional Sanskrit literature. So she'd done a lot of translation. She's best known for her work as a translator. And I studied with her at the beginning of my doctoral studies. Unfortunately, she died early, early in life, unfortunately. So then...
so she was your guru?
She was my first guru, really my first guru there.
Okay.
And then I came to Pune in India, in Maharashtra, to study with Ganesh Tite, who is a scholar of the Brahmana sort of Vedic literature at Pune University. And I worked with him for a year.
1 year?
Yeah, 1 year.
Okay.
And then I did my dissertation, completed my degree. And I've been teaching, so after teaching for a short period at Harvard and University of Virginia, then I went to my current position at Washington and Lee, also in Virginia.
Okay, so what was the first Dharmashastra that you read?
The first one I read, well, it must have been from Manava Dharmashastra, or Manusmriti, as it's also known.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's very, probably the most famous. But then I became particularly interested in some works that are probably a bit older, earlier in that tradition. The very earliest works.
Is, an old.
It's old, probably composed sometime around the 2nd century of the Common Era. But before that, you had these works called Dharmasutra. There's 4 or 5, depending on which ones you include. Of these Dharma Sutras. They're all probably were composed a bit earlier than the Manusmriti. The earliest was probably Apastamba. And what's interesting about that is, according to the work of my subsequent guru, or indirect guru, I never studied with him directly, but he's been a sort of mentor to me over many, many years, is Patrick Olivelle. Also well known for his translations of many Sanskrit works. And his research sort of led to, I think, a very persuasive argument that the earliest of these Dharmashastra texts was the Apastamba Dharma Sutra, which was probably composed in the 3rd century BCE, and probably in the context of social and religious developments that were happening in India in the Mauryan era.
Yeah. So what did you like the most in Manusmriti?
Well, in
the
all these
content?
works, I mean, there's much to be interested in. Not all of it is appealing to people in the modern day because it teaches some old-fashioned ways, particularly in the area of social hierarchy,
Yeah.
that are no longer favored. But you can learn so much about the author's perspective on society and on religious ideals. You can learn from there.
Because of why I'm asking this question
Sure.
is Manusmriti is criticized by sometime women activists and
Yeah,
sometimes
sure. Many activists.
yeah,
Yes,
many activists.
it's
So
a
that's why
it's a very sort of it projects a very conservative, traditional social vision that reflects the interests and preoccupations of its authors, who were Brahmin, traditionally trained Brahmin men. So the difficulties that it poses for the modern era are twofold, or actually there's many ways in which one could criticize it, but principally from the point of view of the hierarchical ranking of jatis.
yes.
This is problematic
Yeah.
from the modern point of view. And also, of course, the gender issue that you point to, that it also essentially...
Perception for women.
The depiction of women is, in many cases, unfavorable. I mean, good things are said about women, but in general, they are subordinated to men and to male authority.
I take this kind of Shastra's content and that reflection of that time's social structure, behavior for people. So maybe, I don't know, I'm right or wrong, but so then after that, you Mahabharata, Ramayana.
Sure. I mean, actually, I have to confess, I haven't read Mahabharata cover to cover because it is probably the longest single work in the world. But I've read many parts of it very carefully, especially those parts, of course, the main story narrative. The Mahabharata is like an encyclopedia, really,
Everything
with
is
many subordinate stories are in there. And then there's in the Shanti Parvan and Anushasana Parvan toward the end, or actually the Shanti Parvan is a huge proportion of the whole work, in fact, are actually Dharma teachings embedded in the epic itself. So, yeah, in some sense, the story of the Mahabharata was used as a framework in which to insert many other elements of Indian culture.
Yeah, and different Eastern culture, we can say, So different characters, they have deeply, they shows like in what is now in society.
Well, what was in society then?
Society,
in then, maybe
then,
not
and
now.
even now, I can relate sometime Mahabharata's
Yes, lessons.
we can relate in
that's
many
true.
ways,
Sure.
many parts,
Sure.
many things. So, which character do you like the most in Mahabharata?
I think I would have to say I admire Draupadi.
Draupadi. Okay.
Yeah. There's a very compelling scene in the gambling hall when she has been won in the competition, and Dushasana and Duryodhana summon her to be brought in, despite the fact that she is having her period at that time, and they inform her that her husband, her eldest senior husband, has Yudhishthira has gambled away his whole kingdom and his brothers and himself, and finally he has gambled away her. And she comes in to say, she makes a very interesting legal point, actually. I'm not sure it's always seen as a legal point, but she raises the question whether someone who has gambled away his own self which is to say his own autonomy and freedom, has still the authority to gamble away a possession or a wife. In other words, this ought not to be a valid thing to do. That he does not have the right to do that once he has gambled.
That I'm not your property.
I'm not your property. Exactly.
That was very powerful dialogue.
So, I mean, that's a very striking scene. It's dramatic, of course. Dushasana tries to disrobe her, and Krishna intervenes. But I mean, her own words there, in some sense, are the real act of heroism.
When they were, that sari,
pulling the sari,
so that time Krishna came.
Yeah.
It's very interesting,
Yes.
So, everything. I mean, Dharmashastras are...
I don't know everything. There are many, many, many things I don't know. But I'm interested in many things and have spent a lot of time reading and hearing from Hindus about these traditions as well.
So let's talk a little bit about Ramayana.
Well, Ramayana also is, like all of these great works, they're great stories. They reflect sort of the social ideas of the time. In Ramayana, people generally look to Ram, as the sort of paragon or ideal of the virtuous man, and Sita the same, right? The paragon of the virtuous woman. But it's a virtuous woman whose role is the traditional woman's role of loyal, devoted wife. And devoted in the literal sense of the word devoted, which implies a vow of worship, right? So she's pativrata. So she is meant to worship her husband. Of course, Rama is God, so that makes good sense in that context. But this is the model for. It's supposed to be a model for all women, as they ought to relate to their husbands. But here again, I would say that although Sita, of course, is depicted always as obedient and self-effacing in many ways, in how she expresses herself and how she acts in relation to Ram. Nevertheless, she too, like Draupadi, knows how to stand up for herself when she feels herself to be unjustly accused. Right?
She was, that time. It was, character assassinated.
Assassination, exactly.
That is still going on in our society. I always, talk about when I talk about Sita. So Sita and our mental violence. So Sita was the person who faced for the first time, mental violence. When her character was assassinated,
she spoke indignantly and forcefully in her own defense, and called upon Agni,
Agni Pariksha.
The Agni Pariksha to.
She had to go through.
Well, she didn't have to. She chose to, right? That's the difference. The difference is that this was, as it's depicted in the story. That's all we have is the story. But
you are right. She has chosen it.
She has chosen it as a way to prove her own. This is actually again illegal. I'm sorry to always bring in the issue of law, but because I'm interested in. I gradually shifted my interest from ritual to law. Of course, there are connections between them anyway, because law involves rituals. One of the rituals that is used in law is what is called an ordeal or a vow. So a formal vow. So shap, or divya. So dibya in Nepali, it would be a divine form of adjudication of to determine right or wrong. So you have these vows and ordeals. So there are many such ordeals that were used in classical Dharmashastra. So you could stick your hand into a pot of hot oil and pluck a bean from the bottom, or something like that. In other words, something where you're exposing yourself to, you could be immersed in water, right? There were various, and these sorts of, we call them ordeals in English because in the Western tradition, these were also used in ancient and medieval times.
Oh, is it?
Very similar sorts of practices to what you find in India. And when I say when you find them in India, you find them in Dharmashastra, but you also find them, references to them in inscriptions and other literature and things like that. So we know that it's not just the Dharmashastris who were prescribing these things. These were techniques that were used, and they were used when there was no other human, manushya, means of proving right or wrong. The Dharmashastra texts always say that if there is a way to prove whether someone, who is right and who is wrong, using documents or witnesses or some other form of evidence, then that should be used. Material evidence, worldly, laukik evidence should be used where it is available. But if there's no way to prove using that kind of evidence, then you may take a solemn vow. Or you may, so the vow just means you swear that you are telling the truth. And then they will wait, the judge will wait a certain period of time to see whether there's any sort of divine sign that you've lied. And if that hasn't happened, they accept that vow. The ordeal is similar, so except it's a shorter time frame. You undergo this difficult activity, and then the judges will wait to see what sort of ill effects you may suffer for having been immersed in water, or thrust your hand into, exposed yourself to some physical danger in this way. And if you have been protected, if you are not harmed, if you don't die, then it's judged that you must be telling the truth. Entering the fire was Sita's way to prove that she was a virtuous wife when she had no other means to prove that. And of course, in the story, it's very dramatic. She invokes Agni, the fire appears, she steps in, Agni lifts her back out again, unharmed. And sometimes people compare this to other practices like the so-called sati practice, right?
It was in India and Nepal.
What is more in Sanskrit known as sahagamanam, going along with the husband to the next life. And sati refers actually to the woman who does it, not to the practice. But that's often been compared to Agni Pariksha in Ramayana, but there's thematically, I think, perhaps they had that in mind as a justification for Sahagamanam, for this sati practice. But actually what Sita is doing there is quite different. Of course, her husband hasn't died. It has nothing to do with that.
Yes.
And she is just proving her virtue.
She wanted to prove that I'm pure. I'm not like.
And then at the very end, there's the after Kusha and Lava, have been born, and her doubt is cast upon her once again. This time, she, invokes the earth. She returns to the earth, which is where she came from in the beginning. And I see this at the very end. She disappears into the earth, and Rama is actually left regretful because now she does not come back. So when she entered the fire, she comes back, but when she enters the earth, she's lost to him.
Yes,
at least in the story, right?
And we were, taught that you have to be like Sita, sahanshil huna parcha.
Yeah, but when they say that, they're always referring to Sita as when she is obedient and submissive. But here I'd say in these two cases, she's standing up for herself, and these are the sort of the high crisis points of the story, at least as it concerns Sita, that she is very strong in defending herself, and even at the end, you could say, rebuking Rama, because she enters the earth and does not return to him afterward.
And he was alone.
Yeah, and sorry.
He was
And sorry.
He was regretted.
He was sorry. Yeah, he was sorry. Now, I say all of this without necessarily intending to criticize Rama, because the text itself explains that he was following his Raja Dharma, and setting aside the doubts of the people and so forth, and that he didn't really feel that way. But if you look at the words that he uses in Valmiki Ramayana, they're quite strong words. They're harsh words where he criticizes her. So, I think it's hard to explain it entirely away by saying that he was only saying these words to satisfy the doubts of his
Maybe,
subjects.
he was a great king, so he didn't wanted to disappoint his people.
Yeah.
So
this
that's
is the
why
this is the
the message can be personal matters is nothing for
separate from the public matters. Maybe. But of course, for Sita, it was very personal.
Yeah,
it could not be otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think in these moments she's very admirable. Even when she refuses to be left behind in the palace when Ram and Lakshman are going into exile, she insists on going as her wifely duty, but also she has to overcome his objection.
Yeah.
So
she was also Rajkumari.
Yes.
She was not ordinary person. So. Professor Tim, it's so interesting to talk about Dharmashastras and all. So which Hindu ritual you like the most?
I hadn't expected that question. It's interesting to consider from a personal point of view. Most of my studies have been concerned with these sort of classical rituals involving offerings into the fire or offerings laid before an image. But I think the most enjoyable for personal reasons is sort of the satsang type of worship, where people are worshipping together, and there's usually singing.
Yeah. Beautiful music.
Yeah, I think this is the most enjoyable for me.
Satsang.
Yeah.
In Nepal also there are, many different kind of satsang, which is still going on, but not like before. So could you please tell us a little bit about your childhood?
About my childhood.
Yeah.
Well, that's very different subject, but so I grew up in upstate New York, not north of New York City, in the state of New York, in the United States, in a small town. And my mother had been a school teacher, and my father was a librarian. So I guess probably, certainly after school, many days I would spend my afternoon in the library, and probably that had something to do with the fact that I decided to follow a scholarly career. But, we didn't talk about subjects like these at all in those days. My parents knew nothing about India or Nepal. And but when I went away in high school for boarding school, and then to college. I did my BA at Columbia before I did my PhD.
I've gone through your bio. It was very, interesting and fascinating.
So along that way, I studied a number of different subjects and found my way gradually to the study of India and Nepal. One of my teachers actually, it was almost like a vision of sort of a premonition of the future. While I was at Columbia, one of my professors there was Theodore Riccardi, Ted Riccardi, who is a very important scholar of Nepal's culture. And he taught Nepali at Columbia University, but I did not take it at that time. At that time, I was still early in my training. I was taking Hindi and Urdu and Sanskrit. So 3 languages were 2.
Oh, Urdu also,
Well, I mean, Hindi and Urdu are taught basically as within the same sequence because the grammar is basically all the same. It's just
alphabet is different.
the first, the alphabet and some of the vocabulary is different. So during the first year, they're teaching you Hindi, that's say with Devanagari, and then the second year they introduce the Farsi script. Actually, the professor of that course, Francis Pritchett, was a scholar of Urdu ghazals, but anyway, so that was one sequence was Hindi and Urdu.
And Nepali also
They offered Nepali when there were sufficient students to take it, and Professor Riccardi was the main professor there. I did take a course with him in Pali language, not Nepali, but Pali. Pali.
Buddha was
the language of the Theravada canon of scriptures within the Buddhism of Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, and Cambodia. So I studied Pali with Professor Riccardi, but not Nepali. So I came to Nepali much later.
So you know Pali language
Pali as well. Yeah.
So that time when Buddha was there, that time all script were documents.
So I mean, it's not clear that he was speaking Pali per se. He was probably speaking something similar to the language Ashoka spoke.
Oh, okay.
So Ashoka's edicts, right, are composed in a form of Middle Indic, early Middle Indic, which is close to Pali, but not the same. So Pali is just a literary language, which was developed the sort of in which the scriptures of that probably much of the earliest Buddhist tradition were written. But it's similar. It's quite similar to what the Buddha would have spoken, probably.
So how many languages you know?
Oh, well, I've studied, depends on how much knowledge. For instance, these last few years I've been studying Nepali. I'm not able to converse easily in it now, but I certainly I can read.
You can read, right?
I can read pretty well. And
Nepali language.
Yeah. And I can understand pretty well when people speak, but it's difficult for me to speak myself. So do I know Nepali? I know it a bit, right? I know Hindi much better.
Do you speak Hindi fluently?
Yeah.
In Sanskrit, you can only read or write too?
I can read and write, yes.
Both?
Yeah. But when you learn Sanskrit in Europe and America, you aren't conversing in Sanskrit all the time. So if you studied with a pundit in India, every aspect of the instruction is in Sanskrit.
And it was easy for you.
So I've done that somewhat when I've come to India to study. But in the U.S., you just read. It's treated as a classical language, and you read it and you can write it. But the emphasis is not on speaking. You can recite, and so forth. But in India, so when I went to Pondicherry in 1998, and then again in 2003 through 2005, and then again in 2009 to 10, there are pundits there. You can sit and just have a conversation. They speak to each other in Sanskrit because they are not all from the same state. Some are from Andhra, down there in Pondicherry. Some are from Andhra, some are from Tamil Nadu, some are from Kerala. So the language they are most comfortable speaking together in is Sanskrit. And they sit at the table and discuss whatever is being discussed or what they're going to have for lunch, everything in Sanskrit.
Sanskrit is very powerful language, no?
Yeah, yeah. It's a very beautiful language. It's a very complicated language. The grammar is quite complex. Of course, the Nepali is descended from is all the languages of North India and Nepal are later developments growing out of Sanskrit. But the grammar's changed a lot. Yeah.
Sutras and small one word can describe many.
Yes.
Use. I don't know what to say, but like aham brahmasmi, only one, word can describe whole.
Yes.
Whole
Yes,
universe.
That's right. It's a very compact language, and because of this long centuries of discussion on topics like that, I am Brahma, right?
Aham brahmasmi.
Yes.
God.
Yes. So when you say that, it's the word aham has special significance, referring to the Atman and Brahma. You know what I mean? These are complex concepts that are much bigger than the space they occupy when you say it.
Yes. Atma, Paramatma, Brahmanda.
Yep.
Everything in one word.
Yes, that's right.
Somebody, there are some people, they did PhD on this one word or two word Sanskrit, that is like Tattvamasi, this kind of word,
Yes, a young scholar got his degree at Harvard recently with a dissertation on the syllable Om. Finn Garrity. Finian Garrity has just published, he just completed a few years ago his dissertation on the syllable Om. So it's just one syllable.
One word.
Yeah. Not just, the
Whole
smallest.
PhD on one word.
Exactly.
Om. It's very powerful one, that Om. So this kind of words, there are many to talk about.
Yes.
So, Professor, what do you think, why Sanskrit language is getting popularity in Western universities, like Harvard, Columbia, and other, many more?
So I'm not sure whether the popularity is growing. It's been there for a long time. The reasons have shifted over time. It's not always the same reasons for all people, right? Initially, I think the fascination goes all the way back to the 18th century, when it was realized by British scholars that Sanskrit was related closely to other languages of Europe, like Latin and Greek, and Persian, Old Persian.
German language also there is.
And German, So most of the languages of Europe. That means all the languages spoken in Europe today, with the exception of Hungarian and Finnish and Basque. All the other languages of Europe belong to one family called which is generally called the Indo-European language family. And Indo is there because in addition to all those European languages, the languages of North India and also the languages of Iran, Persia, are part of that family. There are other languages that one finds in Western and Central Asia in antiquity that belong to the family, but these have not survived. Some languages fall out of use after time. So it's a very large family of languages, reaching now, it's since English is spoken all over the world, English is part of this family. But even if you just look at sort of the traditional homes of these languages, it stretches from, Ireland or Iceland all the way to where have Indo-European languages been used they've been spoken anyway as far east as India, right?
But we can notice that some Sanskrit language like in Germany, Lufthansa, their airline's name.
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
a Sanskrit
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
and also in Thailand. Subarnabhumi airport. Subarnabhumi is also Sanskrit language, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
of course.
there are
But
many-
this is a somewhat different matter. So what happened there, and this is something I've become interested in over the last decade, was the spread of Sanskrit and other Indian culture eastward from India to Southeast Asia. And my focus is on Indonesia, what today we call Indonesia, right? The islands of Java and Bali in particular, but also Sumatra and also other
They
parts.
have a lot of Hindu mandirs. Also,
Yes,
right?
yes, Hindu and Buddhist.
I have not been in Indonesia, but
And they are Indonesians, although most Indonesians today are Muslim, they are very proud of this pre-Islamic heritage of the country, and they've preserved these temples carefully. Many of them have been renovated and developed as archaeological sites. In Bali, of course, you still have a majority Hindu population. That's the exception to the rule in Indonesia. And in Bali, the Hindu-Buddhist heritage continues to be a living sort of practice among the people. But throughout all these countries, you find, actually, what's interesting is you meet many Indonesians who are Muslims, but their names are Hindu,
okay.
you know,
Okay.
because the naming practices are much older. Islam really does not become the major factor in Indonesia till around the 15th century. It begins to in the 15th century, which is pretty recent history if you think about it. And the customs of naming, of course, you meet many Indonesians with Arabic or Persian-related names, but you also meet many who have quite Hindu-sounding names. And that's because of this older culture. They also know the Ramayana story. They know the Mahabharata story.
Yes.
These stories are very... not only are the stories known, but they love to hear them told. They have theatrical productions and puppet theater to dramatize episodes from those stories. It's very much part of the ongoing culture. What happened there involved the transmission of Indian, South Asian, let's say, generally, cultural practices, cultural ideals, religious practices, religious teachings, and yes, Sanskrit itself. So we have Sanskrit inscriptions on stone written in Sanskrit, dating back, to the 5th century.
Yes. That was not that time. Paper was not there, so they used to write in stone, right?
Yes, I mean there were other things to write on, but those materials haven't survived. Right. So one of the big problems that I've faced, because I'm interested in the early history of these traditions and in the way in which these traditions have spread and moved with people in response to, cultural and political and economic and social developments. One of the biggest problems is that we have a very thin historical record. The Sanskrit literature is vast, and that's but we have that because all those Sanskrit sources have been recopied over and over and over again. So the manuscripts that we possess are mostly quite modern, of Ramayana or Mahabharata or any of Vedas, right? But the texts themselves, first of all, the Vedas were transmitted for 1,000 years through rote memorization. Just, teacher recites, student repeats. Adhyayana, repeating, and memorizing and having it in the mouth, right? Having it in the mind. But even after they begin to, these things are written down, the old manuscripts have all disappeared because monsoon climate is very rough on paper, palm leaf, cloth.
Yeah.
any of those substances. Birch bark was often used in the north, in like Kashmir and Nepal for writing materials. But generally the climate has, and worms and other insects have destroyed those very old. So if you go to, Greece or Israel or, places like that have a very dry climate, you can find very ancient manuscripts, but those do not survive in monsoon climates. So consequently, anything that was not copied over and over and over and over again out of devotion or interest, because it's beautiful poetry or because it's sacred text, anything that was not copied disappeared. Original copies are gone. So if recopying stopped happening, the text was lost. Which also means we don't have documents like from everyday life. Again, laukik documents. We have very few for South Asia because those sorts of documents were not recopied. And the original was lost, was destroyed.
So there is a chance to misinterpretation of Dharma as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is it?
Absolutely,
Maybe,
because we have only the voices that were preserved and not the voices that were not preserved.
Yeah.
And the voices that were preserved were mostly within this Brahmanical scholarly tradition, because they had a system of copying, recopying, teaching, and so forth. They had they developed a system of preserving and transmitting the knowledge of the Brahmanical form of Hindu philosophy and religion. That's been very fully preserved. But other aspects of South Asian culture, including very early Nepali culture, we have no records unless they are records that happen to be written on stone or metal. And only certain sorts of sources, people don't write a letter to a friend and have it inscribed in stone or metal, because that's a very costly process. It's a costly and difficult process. You just write it on whatever and send it. Wouldn't we love to have personal letters from ancient Nepal? That would be very nice. Here and there you can find such things. So, again, in desert areas, like around the edges of the Taklamakan Desert in Central Asia, there have been preserved huge troves, collections of administrative letters. Administrative means like government officials writing to each other on wooden blocks from a place called Nia in Central Asia. And these are written in Gandhari. It's a form of early Middle Indic. When I say Middle Indic, so Old Indic would be Sanskrit. Pali is already Middle Indic. Prakrit, other Prakrit languages are Middle Indic.
Prakrit means natural one?
Prakrit.
Prakrit.
Yeah, Prakrit, that's the general term that's used for forms of even literary language that are supposed to represent how ordinary people speak. So when you read Kalidasa's dramas,
Meghdut also Kalidas.
Yes, that's also, right? But Meghdut is entirely in Sanskrit. But the dramas, the nataka, the natakas, Shakuntala,
Shakuntala.
Works like that. Abhinyana Shakuntala are they're in Sanskrit and Prakrit. The author has used both languages, and the Sanskrit is put into the mouths of characters who are. It's actually supposed to be an indication of social position. Maybe it's a priest, or maybe a holy man of the Brahmanical type.
Okay.
But other characters their words will be written in Prakrit. So Prakrit will be a form of the language that's it's still literary, but it represents something close. It's meant to represent something closer to ordinary, everyday language. So Nepali is Prakrit in that sense, right? I mean,
there is
it's a later
word,
Prakrit.
you know, Prachin.
Prachina,
Prachina.
yeah, I mean ancient.
Maybe Prachin, yes.
Yeah.
Professor, there are many things to talk about,
Yeah,
you know, with you. So let's talk about Nepal a little bit.
Okay.
Like, how many times have you been in Nepal?
So I think this is my sixth time. So I've been here 6 times. So the first time was in 1991 or 92, the winter of 91 to 92. I was here with my wife, who's here with me now in Nepal. That was when I was doing doctoral research in Pune, but we took a tour of North India, and then we went from, we went from Varanasi to Pokhara, and from Pokhara to Kathmandu, and then down to Patna.
Banaras also is very interesting place
Yeah.
to talk about, you
Yeah,
know,
well,
about Hinduism. That is the place, we'll talk about it later.
But anyway, so the first time I came to Nepal was in that context. And at that time, you know, I was just trying to see a bit of the country. My studies were not focused there.
Okay.
So then I had not been back again until 2014.
Oh.
So the year before, 2013 or so, or 2012, a colleague of mine at Washington and Lee University approached me with the idea that we might together teach a course on the social structure of Nepal.
For your students?
For our students, an interdisciplinary course. So I'm in religious studies and law, and she is in economics.
Okay.
So this is
Dr. Sikha.
This is Dr. Sika Silwal,
Okay.
right? So she had just started at the university a year or two earlier, and she had the idea that it would be nice because Washington and Lee University has three. Our academic year has 3 terms: a 12-week fall term, a 12-week winter term, 12 weeks of classes followed by exams, you know, and then a 1-month spring term. So it happens at the end of April and most of May. And during that spring term, students take only 1 course. So it's an opportunity to take students off campus and maybe even overseas. So every year, a certain number of courses, maybe 10 or 12 courses, I think generally, are taught off campus, and some of those are overseas. So we decided, let's do one in Nepal.
You thought that, you know,
This is the time. We'll go to Nepal.
Can be the best place.
She's from Kathmandu. She's
Nepal,
a native.
yes.
So we'll have the advantage of her sort of local knowledge and contacts and the tradition, but also the idea was that we would have the course be about all Indian and Nepali society from all these different angles: history, law, religion. Right, I could talk about Dharmashastra and the concept of the caste system, and also gender, many different topics. She would talk about it from the social science and economic implications.
So you are coming every year for...
Well, not every year, but the idea was to do it maybe every second year.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? It's difficult to do it every year because there's so much planning.
So this time also your visit is for this purpose, right?
It's for the same purpose. That's right. So then, this discussion started in 2012 or 2013, and then we both came in 2014 to make preparations. And the course was supposed to run for the first time in 2015. But then that was the morning of our departure from Virginia. That was the time of the earthquake.
Oh,
The big earthquake in 2015.
Yes.
So the course, we taught the course, but we taught it on campus in Virginia, and the travel was canceled that time. But then we taught the course with here in Nepal in 2017 and 2019.
Then again,
Then COVID.
Yeah.
So there was a big interruption, and after
So
5 years, we're
this
back
is,
now.
So third time.
This is the third time teaching it
Okay.
here.
I'm
Yeah.
teaching here. So,
But it was very appealing to me to come to do it with her, although most of my research had been based in India, right, and Hindi and all of these other
Sanskrit.
Sanskrit. But actually, it was very appealing to me to just by coincidence. My interest in Nepal had been growing anyway for two reasons. First of all, I'm interested in, as I said, the spread of North Indian culture and religion and law beyond the bounds of Madhya Desha, right, the middle country of the Ganges Valley, out to various regions like South India, Java. I've been doing a lot of work on Dharmashastra in Java. And also into the Himalaya, right? So in the Himalaya, also that is, you could say these are the regions that are just beyond the birthplace of many of these traditions, and absorbed them very early on. So in Nepal, as early as the Lichavis, right?
Yeah.
All the way back in the
oldest
4th century,
country in the world.
fourth century, you already have Changunarayan inscription
I heard
in
that
Sanskrit.
you really like that, Changunarayan's.
Well, I mean, it's the oldest inscription in the Kathmandu Valley, and it's very historically very important because there you hear Manadeva, sort of talking about the reasons for seeking to expand his kingdom, right, to honor the memory of his father. You have his mother, suggesting that she ought to perform sahagamanam and follow her husband on the funeral pyre, and he convinces her not to. So that's an interesting social element there.
Manadev's mother.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of interesting things.
Please tell us a little bit about more what you like about Changunarayan Mandir.
Well, it's a beautiful temple. I mean, it's been completely restored after the earthquake. There was some damage there. The last time we visited in 2019, the temple was held up with supporting posts. Now it's completely restored. Actually, it's been painted now, so all the woodwork has been painted, which is very typical of how things
Sika
work.
was saying that, when you were in Changunarayan, that you were reading, that has been written in stone.
Right, so that the Changunarayan inscription is there on a post in the back, in a pillar in the back. So I like to bring the students and show them these very old artifacts of Nepal's history. Of course, when we go to Lumbini, we see the much older inscription of the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka Maurya, who calling himself Piyadasi. Of course, that's his actual proper name, making the village of Lumbini tax exempt on account of the holiness of having been the birthplace of the Buddha.
So, have you been in Gorka?
Yes, yes. So we just came from Gorka, actually.
Okay.
And in Gorka, I was very excited to see that in the museum, they have a new museum.
Yes.
Which was not there or was not open anyway the last time I visited in 2019.
Okay.
And in that museum,
this time
we went to see it.
Okay.
In the past we've taken them to see the palace up on the hill, right? But now this museum's very, very good. And one thing that I was surprised and delighted to see there was the manuscript copy of Prithvi Narayan Saha's what is known as the Dibya Upadesh. Dibya Upadesh. And this is supposed to be a sort of record of his own thoughts, of his own words. We don't know, of course, exactly if he dictated it or, exactly how close it is to his own words, but it's presented as his own words. And I had just been recently written an article.
About Prithvinand Cha?
Yes, about Saha royal policy from that time up to the Ranas.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and in that article, I had discussed in some detail this Dibya Upadesa, and but the only access I had to it was there have been 2 published editions of it. The first was by the very famous Nath Yogi scholar, Yogi Narahari Nath, who published many important historical documents. He's a very important scholar of Nepal's history because not only has he written about the history, but he has published in printed form important historical documents, including this Dibya Upadesha. And so I had that edition. And then I had another edition that was published by a couple of other Nepali scholars subsequently. And these are very similar, but I had not, as far as I could see, the original manuscripts were not available to the public.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Upadesh.
Yeah, of the Dibya Upadesha. So all I had was the printed version. You know what I mean? And there's always some question about, Yogi Narahari Nath is a great scholar, but there's always some question, has he recorded everything completely that was on the manuscript? Has he made some editorial adjustments?
Oh, so we don't
that
have
sort of
that original script of
the original,
Upadesh.
written version, right?
Written version.
So so they don't have that original version on display in the museum, but they have photographs of it. Photographs of the complete text in the gallery. So this was wonderful because I had a chance now finally to see, at least in photographic form, the original document, which was the one that was used by Yogi Narahari Nath. So that's good. And I could see, by seeing the photograph of the original document, I could see that on the bottom of the first page, there's a further piece of information written maybe later by a different person than who wrote the main text. But it says something about where that it was written on the basis of information provided by the head of such and such district. So this is useful information that wasn't available. So that's one reason I was very happy to go to Gorka on this trip, because I'd just written this article. Now I can go back and make...
another article you can write now.
No, it's not another, but it hasn't come out yet, so there's still time to change, to insert some additional information on the basis of seeing that.
I've gone through your write-up about, Gorka, and it was cases of Gorka. The title was like that in your website. And,
I think, yes, it was religious law.
Yes, it was focused on state
building.
process.
State building,
Yeah,
exactly.
state
That's the
building.
article I'm referring to. So that hasn't been published yet.
It's not published, right?
I have the proofs.
Okay.
I've received the proofs and corrected the proofs. You know what I mean? The final copy before it goes to the press. But
synopsis is there, right, in internet?
There's
also
the synopsis is there, and it should be out this year.
Oh, okay.
It should be out this year. It's just there was some delay in the publication on the editorial level, but
and you have written one book also about Hinduism.
So there's this also. I was going to say one of the reasons I became much more interested in Nepal about 10 years ago was partly because I began to work with these sorts of documents like Dibya Upadesha that have survived in Nepal, but also because Nepal, I told you that manuscripts don't survive very well in monsoon climate. But Kathmandu is somewhat protected. I mean, it is also monsoon climate, but Nepal, the hill country of Nepal, is somewhat protected from the strongest effects of monsoon climate on manuscripts. So the National Archives in Kathmandu have a lot of very old Sanskrit manuscript and other manuscripts, Sanskrit and also Newari and Nepali manuscripts preserved there,
Okay.
Much older than what you could find in India.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so another area of interest for me is a group of scriptures in the Shiva tradition called Shiva Dharma. Shiva Dharma.
Shiva Dharma. Yeah.
It's just called Shiva Dharma. There's a Shiva Dharmashastra, there's a Shiva Dharmottara, and a list of other works associated with that are often preserved together in a single manuscript with Shiva Dharmashastra. So I got interested in this group of scriptures because I've been interested in Shaivism anyway, but also because the Shiva Dharmashastra, one of the things that text is doing is it's trying to present a revised version, a revised understanding of Varnashrama Dharma.
Oh, okay.
So that's right. I mean, when you think of Varnashrama Dharma, you think Manu, right? You think Manu Smriti, very hierarchical and so forth. In Shiva Dharma, this was an early form of Shiva devotion. These texts were composed to guide how lay people, not monks, not ascetics, but ordinary people could worship Shiva and could worship God as Shiva.
Yeah.
And one of the things it does in the 11th chapter of the Shiva Dharmashastra is it sort of adjusts the concept of the Varnas and the ashramas to say that all Varnas can worship Shiva. And
There's no discrimination.
Almost no discrimination. They move in the direction of a more egalitarian, at least as regards approaching Shiva.
Shiva, yeah.
So that's very interesting to me. And the best manuscripts, the oldest and most reliable manuscripts of this work that we used in editing and translating the text come from Nepal.
Oh, okay.
You see? Also, there are many texts in the Shiva Dharma collection that exist only in Nepal manuscripts.
Maybe many Nepalese, they don't know about.
No, maybe they don't, but now they can because, well, first of all, Naraharinath published this one version of this full set of texts, but he was not really doing a comparative analysis of the different surviving manuscripts. He was doing what traditional scholars have often done is they choose one manuscript and basically use that as the basis for the published version, maybe making a change here and there based on comparison, but not systematically.
So, could you please tell us a little bit about Prithvinaran Saha, what you know?
Well,
like
what I find interesting about him is that he conceived this idea to expand his kingdom, right? Gorka's a tiny place, really. Up till that point, Gorka had been just this one of several kingdoms, and actually the real power center was Kathmandu Valley, which were the Newar people, and those kingdoms, or that sometimes united, sometimes not, right? Sometimes united, ruled basically out of Bhaktapur, Badgaon, but sometimes separate, right? And, so already there was a tradition, both in the Newar community and also in the Pahari society, to, when they're thinking about how society ought to be structured, how to rule a kingdom, they were often looking to what, the Dharmashastra ideals, or to the examples set by Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? So imitating or adapting that sort of Sanskritic tradition to somehow apply it in the hill country. So this began a long time ago. It began with the Lichavis, right? The Lichavis were already doing that. You also had Jayastiti Malla, right? Who is said to have sponsored the translation of Dharmashastra into Newari, right? There's a Newari version, or Newari sort of commentary or paragraph. I have not studied this because I don't know Newari, but I've read about it. Then even before Prithvi Narayan Shaha, you have Ram Shaha, who issued a number of rules or laws.
Yeah. King of Justice, we can say.
Right?
That,
Yeah, he had this reputation, like Jayasthimala also. Jayasthimala also was known as a very just king. So this notion that justice goes with dharma, teaching some form of dharma that is along the lines of varnashrama dharma.
Yeah.
So that idea is already there also with Ram Shaha. We don't have Ram Shaha's sthithis or tithis in their exactly original form, but we have a sort of version of them that's been preserved, that was published and translated by my former teacher, Professor Riccardi, who also, by the way, published and the translation and edition of the Changu Narayan inscription. So this is that same professor of Nepali from Colombia that I mentioned.
Oh, okay. So he has visited.
Oh, he's been in Nepal. In fact, he
Yeah.
was in Nepal. Do you remember when there was an accident at the airport? A plane went off the runway at yeah. He was interviewed
Turkish,
in
yeah?
the he was there
Okay.
at the airport and was interviewed in the newspaper about that. So I think
Okay.
after he retired from teaching, he was basically living much of the time in Nepal. He's passed away since then. So,
So,
anyway, so my interest in Prithvi Narayan Shaha is how he is continuing this tradition, right, of issuing laws. He didn't issue a set of laws, but nevertheless, in the Dibyopadesh, if this truly does reflect his own ideals or ideas, then it would seem that he was attempting to continue this practice of ruling like a traditional Hindu king. He speaks, or the text speaks, of how Nepal is a garden of the 4 classes and the 36 castes, right? This notion of Nepal as a garden of many different groups. Yeah. Actually, somehow in that text, they switch it and it's char jati and chatis barna, but I think it meant to be the other way around. I mean, this is a beautiful image, actually, the notion of a garden, but the less beautiful part of it is the hierarchical sort of ranking that comes with that traditionally. And this has always been, I think, a bit of an awkward fit for the Kathmandu Valley and for Nepal in general, because the groups that are actually represented in Nepal don't all fit in, they're not groups that exist in India. You don't have Muggars and Gurungs, and you don't have all of these groups,
Nepal,
right? Only in Nepal.
Then you shifted Hinduism to laws, or
Yeah.
it was together?
Well, I mean, so once you start talking about law in ancient India, Nepal, Java, it's not limited exclusively to Hindu, right? It's not. Some of those elements of law are not actually exactly religious law at all. They're just law. But a lot of it traditionally has been presented as religious law.
Religious law.
And if it's religious law, it's mainly Hindu law. I mean, Buddhism is an element here as well, but Buddhist law in the narrow sense really just applies to the rules that apply to monks and nuns.
Not
right?
all.
Not for all of society.
Professor, what do you think? Hindu is only dharma, or it is philosophy also?
Well, Hindu's many things. So when we use the label Hindu now, it certainly can include this sort of Sanskritic tradition, but there's many aspects of Hinduism which is not Sanskritic, right? So you get this whole bhakti movement, bhakti devotion, that gives rise, starting in South India, you have the Alvars and Nayanars. These are sort of poets singing of their personal experience of God in but using the Tamil language.
Okay.
Right? You find similar things in Karnataka, in the people Lingayat tradition coming out of Karnataka. You find in Maharashtra people like Eknath. You have
Within Hindu, there are
these are Hindu
yeah,
these are
but
Hindu
yes.
teachers. I mean, nowadays we would call them Hindu.
Like
Hindu is not the
Om Santi, that is different, right? Here also. Like,
There's so many different. I mean, all the modern gurus like Satya Sai Baba, who's very popular in Nepal. They're all. You would call them all Hindu, but the label Hindu, of course, is a more recent label. I mean, Hindu. The word Hindu comes from Persian, right?
lots of with, diversity,
It refers to a
within-
geographical
Yeah.
thing. It refers to the Sindhu River and the world, around or beyond that river.
In
So
India, they have written in their constitution that is Pantha, not Dharma.
Pantha, Pantha.
yeah,
So it's a
difference
path.
between- yeah,
It's a path. Yeah, it
yeah.
means path. Yeah, Dharma is
So-
a much broader category, and it really it's not. It doesn't line up perfectly with the English word religion. Sometimes it's used in a very similar way, but actually,
Dharma and
Ashoka.
religion is different, right? Religion
Well,
also?
I mean, there's overlap. The concepts overlap, but they're not. You can't.
That is not proper translation of
It's
Dharma
not
and
an
religion.
exact
Not
translation,
exact.
but the word Dharma is used this way by Asoka Maurya, the king Ashoka, right? In his edicts, in his decrees that are published, on stone inscriptions all over South Asia, including Lumbini, although the Lumbini inscription's a single unique one, but he has sets of rock inscriptions and pillar inscriptions. Ashoka's using the word Dharma to refer to a sort of, social philosophy, right? So you wanted to say, is Hinduism a philosophy or a religion, or is it both? There are religious elements, there are philosophical elements, there's social elements, there's legal elements. Hindu can cover a lot of different things. And it doesn't only cover, the point I was trying to make is it doesn't only cover things that are expressed in the Sanskrit language. It can express, it's stuff that can be expressed. Ramcharitmanas, right, of Tulsidas is in Hindi, right, or a form of Old Hindi. Right, Braj Bhasha, various other regional languages.
So you teach our Muluki Ain as well?
Yeah.
Nepali Muluki Ain in
Yeah.
your class?
Well, yes, we just read a bit of it because it's very long.
Yeah, it's very
The
long.
Muluki Ain, the Ain, originally it was just called Ain, the first edition.
Okay.
Then subsequent publications
That
added
Jangabahadurana
added the word,
was-
that he commissioned.
Yeah.
That he commissioned. I mean, he has organized a council to compile all these laws, and the full book is like this, a
Yes.
very big book. So we can't read it all. We have 4 weeks here. We have to cover a lot of material, but they read a bit about how the Ain was, how Jang Bahadurana got the idea to make the Ain. There'd never been such a book. And
So history you
we're looking at the history of it. They see some examples of the laws that are presented in it. And
Nice amended version also.
we will look a
right?
little bit at how it gets
Yeah.
amended. Of course,
There is 2 books now.
yeah.
There are. One is Muluki Aparat Samhita, that is criminal code, and Muluki Samhita,
Yep.
that is civil code of
Right.
Muluki Ain.
Right. And then, after 1963, they try to make it less hierarchical, right? They tried to change it, but so we look at the legal developments. We look at the Ain as part of legal developments and constitutional developments in the modern history of Nepal.
So what is do you practice spirituality?
Of my own unique form, yes. I'm not traditionally... So first of all, you asked about my personal background, and I didn't go into the religious component of it. My mother was from a farm a traditional farm family in western New York State. She was Christian, and she was a very devout Christian. My father was from New York City. He was Jewish. He was not religious at all, neither were his parents, but ethnically, so to speak, he belonged to the Jewish Janjati, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right, if I can put it that way. So my own religious background, you could say, was mixed already.
Yeah.
They had an intercaste marriage, you might say, right? Neither of their families was happy about that. You know,
That time it was very
not at that time. It was
Yeah.
it was considered inappropriate that a Jew and a Christian should marry, but they met in college and they got married.
Okay.
Okay. So I had some religious training from both sides, but I did not embrace either of those traditions as a spiritual, from the spiritual point of view. You know, I acknowledge my historical connection to it, but I don't. I'm not a practicing Christian or a practicing Jew. And then I've spent my entire adult life studying Hinduism, you know what I mean, and Buddhism. So I guess you could say that I am. When you're in the comparative study,
meditation and all that.
yes, when you're in the comparative study of religion, it's very hard to take a single panth,
Yes.
and adhere to it strictly, because you understand. You realize how there's some truth and value in many different ones.
Yeah.
So in the end, you have to make find a personal path of your own in light
So you are
of
practicing that.
Yes,
Your personal
that's the best I can do.
Right. So
I don't think it's better than the others, but it works for me.
you're trying yourself.
Yeah.
So what are the similarity or differences between Hinduism and other main religions?
Well, I mean, there are many similarities. I mean, Hinduism and other major religions in the world are concerned with questions beyond this life, right? What is the bigger picture, Here we are living our lives in this world. What is there beyond this life or beyond this world? And once thought about that, what implications does that understanding have for how we should live now in this world? So in my mind, that's something that you find in all religions.
Similar.
The similarity that you begin to talk about religion when you begin to ask, what is the meaning of our existence? What will happen after we die?
Punarjanma, Purvajanma.
Yeah, all of those things. That's
Yeah, it's a
before,
similarity,
after, but
right?
also
Yeah.
what is the consequences of what we do and say and believe in this life? Is there justice in the cosmos?
Yeah.
Or is everything just historical accident? So these are religious questions, and different religions come up with very different explanations, right? So some of that is what religions are doing, is they're just trying to explain things that are not visible to us, to our eyes in this world. God, soul, rebirth, heaven, hell, all of these things are...
What do you think about, it's all things. What do you think in your opinion?
I don't think my own perspective on it is any more interesting than any other. But once a religion comes up with some explanations about these things, then those explanations have implications for how we ought to live now. And the funny thing is although the explanations are very different from one religion to another, there's many commonalities, many common features about how they prescribe one should live in this world on account of that. So the rituals will be different, but general outlook maybe not that
Justice,
different.
right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
ultimate
justice.
What do you think? Is there any misconception about Hinduism?
Well, surely there are misconceptions, but I think the misconceptions are usually, I mean, sometimes they're just the misconceptions of people who are not very familiar with Hinduism or Hindus, and thus their misconception is they have wrong knowledge. But there's also a kind of misconception which comes from having correct knowledge but partial, not comprehensive. And this is a misconception that even I think some Hindus can have, because of course nobody knows better than you know, the Hindu life that you've been exposed to by growing up in this culture. You know what I mean? In your family, in the rites that your family proposes. But that doesn't mean you have any idea necessarily what Hinduism means to someone in Tamil Nadu or Kerala or Bengal, or, you know what I mean? Different, and then there's Shaivas, Vaishnavas, Shaktas, there's many different punths, right, and sub-punths.
It's particular, they have to do.
Particular, right? It's extremely diverse, extremely, there's so much variation from place to place and also from time to time. So over history, the tradition has changed a lot. Yeah. Maybe certain general ideas haven't changed a lot, but lots of ideas and lots of practices have changed over time. So I think there's a certain misconception that can come simply from having a very limited, personal experience without the broader perspective.
And there is a saying, in Sanskrit that alpa buddhi bhayankari.
Yeah.
It's so interesting so talking to you. Would you like to say something? We are in...
Well, I'm so happy to be here. I always enjoy my time in Nepal and in Kathmandu. And I anticipate continuing to collaborate with Shikaji in teaching this course in subsequent years. I'm not sure exactly when the next time will be, but soon, I think. And I'm always grateful to the warm welcome that we receive when we come here. Also, my wife has accompanied me. This is the third time in Nepal, and she feels the same way. She's a practicing artist, and the visual experience of being in Nepal, I think, is very stimulating to her as well.
Thank you for coming in this our small studio and sharing your experience, knowledge about Hinduism and many things.
Yes.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.